Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome, welcome to the Texas Pathways Institute. Can you believe it? We're together again. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love seeing your smiling faces and the good conversations that have already started today. So excited for us to get to be back together again to celebrate and to encourage one another into good work. And so just before we get started on our institute, we have asked one of our chancellors to come and give a welcome. Just before I introduce him, I would ask that because we are Texas and we are still susceptible, that when you're sitting at a table, would you mind wearing your mask? I know that there are times when you will be with your team that you might feel comfortable taking it off, but when we're in a big crowd like this, we might be able to keep each other even more safe. Oh, look at you all had your masks. Thank you so very much. And with that, then I've asked Dr. Brent Wallace, who is the chancellor from the North Central Texas College, to come and give you a North Texas welcome.
Good afternoon. Welcome to North Texas. We're proud to have you here. We've given you the best weather we know to offer, and absolutely no traffic. So we made this happen for you today. I know that it was difficult for many of you to make your way here this morning and this afternoon. So we appreciate even more so with the weather and some things that you were able to be here today. I think now more than ever, the work of Pathways is growing in its necessity. It's not only important work and it's work that's valuable to our students, but it's also very timely. We know what our students have been going through over the past 2 years, and specifically the impact that the COVID pandemic has had on our student retention numbers and our matriculation of our students. And the last thing they need to do is lose credits or feel like they're not on a pathway for success. And so I applaud everyone that's here. It's my understanding that 48 of our community colleges are in the house today. So give yourselves a hand for that. NCTC, North Central Texas College, of which I am chancellor, is a fast-growing college located in Gainesville, Texas, and we have 3 campuses in Denton, Corinth, and Flower Mound. We have campuses there, and we are north of the DFW area. And of course, this is the home of Dallas College, and so we're always glad to have you in this area. My team's in the back, and if I don't give them a shout out, they'll probably disinherit me. So NCTC's in the back row. I'm a little concerned about that. But I appreciate, again, you being here today. We look forward to the day's events in the upcoming days. And thank you and welcome to North Texas, folks. Thanks.
And so our time begins. These institutes have become so important for our work together. And so I appreciate you coming together for us to have this institute. So you know that from the very beginning, our institute model has been different from just being a convening. And this one is no different. So we have created a set of conversations for you that this will be something that your team will work through, almost like a 3-day workshop where you will be with your coaches again. You had your advanced work that you did. You will have some great data to look at about your students and the disaggregated data about their experiences. But I wanted you to know that we continue to align our work around the original model that we started a few years ago collectively, dedicating ourselves to socioeconomic mobility of the people in our communities. So I appreciate what Dr. Wallace said about how urgent this work is, even more so now with COVID and so many people in our communities who have lost their jobs, who are having food and housing insecurity issues, and all the better time for us to follow our hearts that drew us to this work and help those people in our communities. And we do so by following this model, this basic framework that we have collectively dedicated ourselves to, this Pathways framework. And so this institute will be no different. We will continue with this model, but we're going to do one thing to expand it. And that is, you know, those of you who've been with us, wait, let me time out. How many of you have been to a Pathways Institute before? By a show of hands. Look at you. Dedicated people, thank you. How many of you, this is your first institute? This framework's kind of new and you're getting in. Great. How many of you think you've maybe been to every one of the institutes since the beginning? I knew there was a big group. Look at you. Thank you so very much for your dedication to this work. So you know that since the beginning, we've been talking about this pathways model by saying this is really about us beginning with the end in mind, that we're trying to help students reach their end goals. And what are their end goals? Good careers. And so we are focusing our work from the beginning. We talked about it as these bookends, that we had 8th graders who were choosing endorsements and the right dual credit to make sure that they're not wasting credit even before they get to us, and that we would create clear pathways to their credential and to careers. But COVID really accelerated this work and exaggerated the need for us to continue to lean in on other folks in our communities. It's not that we weren't serving adults, it's just we weren't explicitly talking about adults when we were talking about our guided pathways work. And so now more than ever, we lean into this group of adults, displaced workers, those who are in jobs, but they're underskilled to do those jobs. So we have a wider range of entry points. So this whole institute is about onboarding. And so we're going to widen our view about where those students come to us from, both from high school still, but also adults in our communities. And we want to make sure that we're connecting and helping them enter and progress and succeed. So same model, but as we talk about adults and the ways that they connect, we want to make sure that we're making it easy for adults to shop our programs and know what kind of careers they're connected to and what kind of wages are associated with that. We've been working on that for some time, but I think that we could still use some work in making it more explicit to our students of what the high demand jobs are in our communities and which one of those jobs lead to a living wage. And so we have this model that we will continue to structure our work around. We will continue to be dedicated to the 4 pillars of the work and the essential practices that are in them. This institute in particular, we will be talking about multiple entry points. We'll be talking about career exploration, early contextualization, ways of getting students to connect to the career and have career-related experiences early on in their time with us, helping them make clear choices, and also about having work-based learning experiences to make it practical and contextualized. But most of all, when we talk about the work that we're doing with True, how many of you have heard about our work with True? It's a whole statewide thing now, right? Texas reskilling and upskilling through education. And we're doing this with our guided pathways framework. So how are we helping Texans quickly reskill and upskill so that they can get good paying careers in 6 months or less? So this means, my friends from ESG, this means that we have to lean into bringing in our continuing ed folks. How many continuing ed folks in the house? We have to bring you into our conversations more explicitly. Thank you so very much for being here. So we have a lot of ground to cover to make better alignments and get students in and through as quickly as possible. So these are our purposes for this institute. I want to make sure that you are planning systemic improvements that help students. So you know that because this is an institute, every conversation you have for the next 3 days is setting you up to get to a point on Friday afternoon where your team will put together an action plan for what you're going to do when you go home. So you'll have these plenaries, you'll have times to talk with your colleagues, you'll have time to learn from your colleagues who've had some success in this space, and you will have time with your team each day facilitated by a coach that's going to walk you through data so that by Friday afternoon, you have some really solid plans of what you need to do next to make these kinds of things happen for students, making sure that they gain early momentum from multiple places that they start, that they can choose a program of study, knowing where it's headed, and with very little chance for the loss of time and credit, that they will connect with a community of faculty and others in your college so that they understand what that career field is like. And then lastly, that they can move seamlessly to completion from the first day with a clear view of where they're headed to good careers in their field. So those are going to guide all of the conversations that we have in the next 3 days. So welcome, and we will kick this off in a big way. Our first speaker for this plenary is going to be introduced by my boss. So I'd welcome Jacob Friday to the stage to give a word of welcome and to frame and introduce our first speaker. Would you please help me welcome Jacob Friday?
Good afternoon. Muy buenas tardes. What an amazing view see all of you here today gathered on a single mission, the mission being in service of our hundreds of thousands of students who need us every day. Beautiful thing to see you. You should all come up to the stage and watch yourselves. I am deeply honored to say to you, thank you. Thank you for the amazing, incredible, and passionate work that you do on behalf of all of our students. To say that you, community colleges in the great state of Texas, went well beyond the call of duty the last 18 months as we address our pandemic needs of our students on both the healthcare crisis and then the economic crisis is an understatement. We saw it through the lens of your presidents and chancellors. We saw it through the lens of your chief academic officers at the association because we work with them hand in glove as you were managing those tough times with your students and on behalf of your students. And on behalf of the entire association, the Success Center team, and the TAG team, one hearty thank you to each of you. I also want to recognize the amazing leadership of Dr. Cynthia Farrell and the entire Success Center team. And I want to recognize a number of professionals here from the association. And I also want to give a special thanks and recognition to all of your pathway coaches, your mentors, your advisors, who not just here this week, but for whom weeks and months have been leading to this discussion that you all are having to make sure that we continue down this journey in a rightful way. So if I may ask you to give them a special recognition. Now, friends, I'm going to ask you to indulge me in a moment of reflection. As I stand here before you today, I am saddened. The community college students across our great nation have been disproportionately afflicted by the pandemic, both in terms of the economic gain, in terms of short term, because many of our students lost their jobs over the last 18 months, but also because they have been displaced from our college campuses. In Texas alone, we saw not just in the fall of 2020, but also in the fall of 2021, more than 80,000 students displaced from our campuses. Earlier this summer, the US Census released census data because we just finished census. And so we've been studying that census data. I want to share with you a couple of cities, towns, places, communities who you might know. Waxahachie, Texarkana, near my hometown, Cedar Park. I think Andrew Alcantara lives in Cedar Park somewhere. Think of Alice. These places have less than 80,000 residents in that place alone. Imagine, colleagues, friends, if we lost a city of the size of Waxahachie or Texarkana or Paris or Gainesville. You put Gainesville and Alice together, you still don't have 80,000 student individuals. Imagine if we left them behind in our great society, in our great advancement in terms of the economy, in our great educational systems that we provide. That is a huge loss, I would argue, to humanity, but absolutely to the 80,000 families who are currently not enrolled in our campuses. And I share that moment of reflection, not to be a downer, because we are going to have an exciting, robust conversation, but as a reminder to all of us that we can, as Dr. Greg Williams said earlier, very eloquently in the pre-institute, we need to burn the boat. There is no going back to pre-pandemic. We need to be all in, be innovative, be courageous, bring those 80,000 students back onto our campuses, and the other 80,000 who are still waiting for us to bring them to the campuses and teach them in an innovative way. I invite us to do as Russell Laurie Hart and his phenomenal team at Amarillo College would do, which is to say, love our students every day. So when they come to our campuses, they feel it, they sense it, and then we engage them with our programming. Let us do it together because they deserve it, because we need it, and because we miss them, and we do miss our students. So it is now my great pleasure to introduce to you our keynote speaker, our starting speaker, and a person who you will find to be a treat in content and expertise and advice for all of us. Dr. Chauncy Lennon is a student of anthropology, a field, sir, that I am beginning just now to understand. Having earned his degree at Williams College and then his doctorate degree at Columbia University in anthropology. Not soon after graduate school, Dr. Lennon decided to go into the space of philanthropy, a space that I spent a little bit of time myself and happened to be an important space, I think, in this work that we do, where we take big bets in colleges, across our campuses, across our state, across our union, and have them do all the heavy lifting. But in philanthropy, we advanced that because we believe in our colleges. So you went in and did a tour of duty, as he says, at the Ford Foundation. And then came back to the Ford Foundation, a large portfolio in investments in workforce strategy and workforce development. Thereafter, he worked at JP Morgan Chase as managing director and leader of strategy for the workforce development and economic development strategy. And now, as I would imagine he would say, has a great honor of serving as vice president for learning at work at the Lumina Foundation for Education, Indianapolis base. Folks, TAC, the Success Center, are great partners of the Lumina Foundation, and we are very pleased that Dr. Lennon has joined us today for this important conversation. Please welcome Dr. Chauncy Lennon.
Good afternoon, and excuse me, thank you for those kind words. It is really great to be here. This is my first trip since COVID, and so it couldn't be more exciting to be with all of you here. I love Dallas, not just because of the breakfast tacos. I live in New York City. You can get lots of things in New York City, but you cannot get a good breakfast taco. I want to start by saying a few words about my job. One of the key responsibilities of my job is understanding what is happening at community colleges across the country. So there's nothing more critical to doing my job well than coming to events such as this one, learning from all of you, and sharing my perspective, Lumina, and support colleges. For those of you who don't know the Lumina Foundation, we are focused on the transformations that community colleges are going through. The next chapter, as the title of my talk would say. I'm gonna move, let's see if that works. There we go. Let me give you some context for why Lumina is focused on this next chapter of community colleges. Our strategy is designed around the goal of 60% of adults aged 25 to 64 getting a credential of value by 2025. Now, there's a couple things that we need to be saying about that. Maybe you've heard about the goal, but there's two additional things to know about the goal. The first is that we don't just care about the raw number, we also care about quality. So we don't count every credential. There are certain certificates and certifications, short-term credentials that we don't count because they don't have enough return on investment. Second is equity. We want everyone to have an equal chance to succeed. So we won't view what we are doing as a success unless we remove the barriers to increasing attainment for African American, Hispanic, Latino, and Native American students. The math with the goal is straightforward. To reach 60%, we need to increase the number of adult students, people close to or at the age of over 25, especially adults of color, with quality short-term credentials, certificates and certifications, and occupational associate degrees. In other words, we are focused on community colleges because that is the system that is serving these students and providing these credentials. Of course, we don't need the goal to know that increasing attainment for adult students, students of color, is important. And even if we didn't have the goal, this would be one of Lumina's top priorities. But the goal does give us focus and rigor, and it's a tool for communicating what we think is important. And so we use that as a way to describe why we do what we do. So where are we? As you can see from the slide, we are at, sorry, that's the 60% goal. Let me move the slide along. So we're at 51.9%, the US at large. and where are we in Texas? So Texas attainment, a little lower, it's 47.9, 48%. And if you don't include the short-term credentials, the certificate and certifications, you're at 39.5%. Oh, should I switch? All right, we're going to switch. Sorry. Is that better? Oh, yeah, that's better. No buzz. And, you know, I think I wanted to share this slide because it does begin to show the important place that short-term credentials play, not just in the sort of larger conversation about attainment, but obviously, as we'll talk further, at community colleges. And if you're interested, it's 42% Texas adults have certificates and 4.3% have certifications as their highest credential. Now, a couple last things to say about the attainment goal. We are focused on adults and students of color, but we also believe that if we can make the system works for adults, it will work better for everyone. So when we say this is our focus, it doesn't mean that we're ignoring, we don't care about everyone else, but we do believe that by fixing the system for certain students, you can unlock a better system for everybody. And next, I would say, we also recognize that even if Lumina could devote every penny that we had, if we just spent down our endowment, we wouldn't really transform this problem. We have to collaborate. We have to think of what we're doing as being the R&D dollars that help all of you do what you do better. That, in my mind, is the best use of philanthropy. And we always are thinking about how we are interacting with the system, not standing outside of the system. And then the last thing I want to say is that system change takes time, right? We rely on all of you, the fact that you show up day after day and keep doing what is very hard work that faces some really serious and oftentimes insurmountable seeming obstacles. But that is how we view what we do. All right, so that's what brings Lumina, brings myself to this issue. I think the best place to begin our conversation about the next chapter is by recognizing that community colleges and community college students face a set of new realities and challenges that our community college system and institutions were not designed to address. The list of disruptive forces that have altered the environment community colleges face is both long and familiar. Obviously, we have the economic volatility of the COVID pandemic and recession. Before that, we had the Great Recession. We've got demographic change. We've got resource constraints. We've got rising costs, we've got rising inequality. Also on the list, of course, is the increasing demand for technical skills at all levels of the labor market and across nearly all industries. I know it's not news to this audience, but I just want to cite one statistic from the Georgetown Center on Education and the Workforce. So since 1991, high school graduates' share of good jobs has declined in nearly every state, while associate degree holders' share of good jobs has increased. In Texas, the figures are -5 and +10. So since 1991, there are about 30 million so-called good jobs that do not require a BA. And over time, workers with diplomas are losing ground. That's the -5. While those with associate degrees, in Texas, that's the +10, are gaining ground. So one of the most important new economic realities is that everyone needs some kind of education training post-high school, but not necessarily a BA. What do these forces mean for community colleges? I want to talk about three important impacts. The first is an increasing focus on adult students. As more and more adults need to upskill or reskill, they will become a larger share of the community college student body. Already, adults over the age of 25 represent roughly 40% of enrollment across the US higher education system. And it should come as no surprise that most of these adult students will turn to community colleges for flexible, affordable, job-focused short-term credentials. This is not the same thing as saying that adult enrollments are guaranteed to go up. Even before the catastrophe of COVID, adult enrollment was sloping downward. From 2008 to 2018, the number of students over age 25 and over decreased 2% at degree granting institutions. And of course, none of this is to say that we should focus less on traditional age students, but it's important to look inside the declining numbers to see the dynamics at play. Why are there more adult students? I think the first thing to recognize is that not everyone goes on to a post-secondary degree or credential right away. Let's again go back to this list of disruptive forces. So we've got increasing costs, we've got affordability and inequality, making it harder for people to afford those costs. We've got these resources, we've got time challenges, we've got just basic, not everyone is interested in going forward. And what that means is that across the US, we have 50 million adults, actually more than 50 million adults, that have just a high school diploma. And thanks to COVID, that number is taking a sharp increase, right? So let's look at Texas. On the slide, and I hope folks can see it. I didn't realize it would come out so small. But if you look on the left, you're seeing the educational attainment from ages 25 to 64. So we see there's 25% of adults in Texas, their highest credential is a high school diploma. What's interesting, if you look at the next column, that's actually showing sort of progress. That's showing a narrower age band. So that's residents ages 25 to 34. So that's kind of the upcoming wave of Texans. And you'll notice things are getting a little better. You're seeing an increasing number of bachelor degree holders among this age younger cohort. You're seeing fewer people who don't have any kind of high school attainment. But what you're noticing is that 25% persists, right? So we have a large pool of people who will still be a potential enrollees in community colleges. All right, so if it's true that not everyone is necessarily going to go right away, it's also true that post-secondary education is not a one and done phenomenon. The labor market is demanding more skills and people are responding by seeking out more credentials. Nothing particularly insightful there, right? Sometimes we call that stacking, but it's a long familiar pattern. We know that best. If I go back, we know that best because, let's see if I can go back. There we go. We're very familiar with the idea that people will get bachelor degrees and go on to graduate school. But it's also true that people will get a BA and then potentially get a certificate or a certification, an AA, or a graduate degree. So if you look at the three lower rows of this table, you can see those numbers. And we're really talking, especially for the BA and AA, well, the AA, we're talking about 25% of people with AAs have a short-term credential, and then a little less for the BAs and AAs. So this is a good story. This is a story about people getting more educational credentials so they have more opportunity in the labor market. But there's also a less positive reality here, which is that we have a large number of students who start college but not complete. It's the case that too many people move in and out of education without completing any credential at all. By the 6-year mark, a little over 70% of those enrolled full-time will complete a bachelor's and only 45% will earn an associate degree. And the numbers are worse for part-time students. Students in certificate programs do somewhat better, with completion rates of 50 to 60%, but none of these completion rates are a sign of a well-functioning system. So what does that mean sort of on the macro level? We've got 36 million adults with some college but no degree. Now, if we look at the top row here, what you see is that, close to 20% of those folks will come back to get a short-term credential. So that is also a positive story. It'd be better if people persisted and completed, but still, it's a good thing that people, after they sort of suffer that kind of setback, return to the system to get a credential of value. Now, we can see this from another lens with some recent data that's come out. Paul Osterman, a scholar at MIT, has recently released a report through the Center on Community College Research at Teachers College. And what this table is showing you, this is a survey of working adults And this is actually quite incredible in my opinion. So we looked just at working adults. Paul Osterman discovered that fully half of working adults attended community college, and a quarter of them did so as adults, right? So again, another really clear picture of the critical role that community colleges are playing to educating America's adult workforce. I think we all sort of hazily knew this, but what this data is really making concrete is just how large the scale of the community college is playing in skilling the American adult workforce. Okay, so that's, we've got the folks who are going to come back later in life. We have folks who start, complete or don't complete, but then keep coming back. So that's obviously one of the key things that we need to think about with community colleges. And if the new terrain of community colleges, if the new terrain community colleges are in means that they will serve more adult students, it also means then that there will be an increasing focus on workforce or job-focused offering at community colleges. Again, this may be something you're well aware of, but I think it's worth stating. Right, adult and traditional age students at community colleges are interested in job-focused programs. Research from the Georgetown Center of Education and the Workforce show that 94% of certificates and 57% of associate degrees are in career-oriented fields. So again, I think it's worth just really remembering the scale here. Community colleges are playing a critical role providing workforce job-related education to large numbers of Americans. It's also true that we're hearing a lot about employers. Didn't include a slide here, but I could have included a slide with literally dozens of headlines of how employers are thinking about skills-based hiring, about no longer screening applicant pools for people with just have BAs, rethinking how they design tuition assistance programs, and building talent pipelines that allow people to enter and keep growing their credentials while they stay with one employer. So a much greater receptivity to people with non-BA credentials. And then it's also the case that we're seeing how colleges are changing. Now, evidence is suggesting that community colleges are doing more on workforce education. One challenge that we have here is that we don't have great data, as all of you I think are probably well aware, on non-credit workforce. Texas is actually one of the states that does a little better, but in general, nobody does a great job. And I often have thought of this in terms of one of those medieval maps that has a dragon or a sea creature where on the uncharted oceans, where people thought danger was allied. And so Lumina, in partnership with an organization called Opportunity America, recently funded some research on what's happening in non-credit community college workforce. Many of you, I think, participated in that survey, and I thank you all for the time you spent to help collect input in this data. And what we learned is that if we look at this donut here, if you look at the red, so 34% of enrollment at community colleges in job-focused programs was for credit, and then another 20% was not credit, non-credit. So 54%. So, literally half of what's happening across the country. Now, of course, this is an average. And what's interesting, if you look at the report, you can see that there's huge variation. Some states are much higher and some states are much lower. So you've got to look state by state to understand what the system is doing. But it really shows us, I think, that the system is moving more and more into this role of workforce trainer. I included the Texas numbers. So again, looking at the red, 31% of non-credit students are in job-focused programs, and 17% are credit, and then 70% are in the non-credit. So a little bit less than the national average, but sort of right in the middle band. So one piece of evidence about what is happening over time as community colleges are adapting to the kind of new world around them. Another piece of evidence out there is I like to describe it in terms of the parable of, the fox knows many things and the hedgehog knows one big thing. If we think of BA institutions as hedgehogs, community colleges are foxes, right? What do? They do general liberal arts transfer. They do 4-credit certificates. They do non-credit certificates. They do non-credit certifications. They do remedial. They do ESL. They do adult recreational, right? They are running, community colleges is not one thing, it's 7 or 8 different things. But one of the things and some other research Lumina has funded, we see is increasingly community colleges are doing fewer of those things, right? They're recognizing that the growing importance of the workforce components on the non-credit and 4-credit side of the shop is forcing them to choose to shrink. So they're becoming a little bit more like hedgehogs, but again, doing much more than what traditional BA institutions do. And then another interesting component here, which I think is something I've been very curious about, is that while we've lived through a very challenging time with enrollment in COVID, I've heard and seen a little bit of evidence that in some ways the enrollment in technical courses or workforce courses has actually not suffered the same hit. I don't know that we have good evidence to sort of back that up, but it's an important thing. And if we had better data, we could better sort of decompose what's happening, what's driving the enrollment decreases we're seeing at community colleges. And one last point I want to make here is that none of this, of course, is to say that community colleges should abandon the mix of sort of liberal arts or gen ed and more skill-focused training, right? We want to have this sort of gen tech mix in which everyone is getting a dose of both. Ideally, you're getting it in a way that sort of gives you the skills you need when you hit the labor market, no matter what kind of trajectory, kind of program you're in, that you're going to have the greatest opportunities for success. All right, and one last thing to consider, and again, I apologize, this is maybe a little hard to see from the back of the room, but I'll sort of walk us through it, is competition. So the report by Osterman is very helpful because it makes perfectly clear that in the US, the largest trainer are employers, right? That's who's doing the most to train the adult workforce. But next is community colleges. That is the place where after what they get on the workplace, people are getting trained. So that's another important thing to understand the important role community colleges play. But well, it's great to sort of see yourself at the top of the pack. It's also important to look over your shoulder. And what this table is showing is that while community colleges have been used by 20% of adults, that when it comes to things like online programs in terms of a course, that is has had greater uptake than community colleges, right? So we think of the online issue as partly one of community colleges, BA institutions. All of them had to do more remote education during COVID. That will continue in various ways. That had some benefits, lots of challenges. But I think it's also, we've got to sort of keep our eye on the fact that increasingly, and maybe especially so for adults, the ability to get training online is going to pose a kind of a challenge to the role that community colleges have been playing in workforce education. Okay, so the economy has shifted, and that has transformed the landscape of community colleges. Need is increasing, right? Post-secondary education is more necessary than ever. Than it's ever been to succeed in the labor market. The market is shrinking, enrollment is going down. The customer base is shifting, fewer first-time gen ed transfer students, more adults. The composition of offerings are also shifting, more workforce, and competition is rising. There's a lot more to add to this list here, but that's enough for today, maybe. So the question is, how are community colleges responding? What does this new chapter look like? And, if we look at the 3 goals listed for this conference, I think we get a good sense of what this response looks like. And as it happens, your focus looks a lot like Lumina's focus. Your goals are all framed through the lens of onboarding, but I'd argue that they represent the 3 critical adaptations community colleges are making to the new landscape they inhabit. So let's talk about each one. Your first goal speaks to the reality that there will be multiple starting points, and students should be able to, quote, enter a program of study aligned with their interests, strengths, and aspirations. Another way to put this is not everyone is enrolling in an AA degree program. One of these starting points, of course, is certificates. In fact, certificates are now the primary workforce credential for those who will not obtain degrees in the US. But we have a very significant challenge with alignment. Some recent research, which I've kind of translated here in this slide from an organization called The Third Way, shows us just how misaligned things are. When we look at the ROI, a return on investment of certificate programs, a little less than half have any ROI in the first 5 years. And then to make matters worse, only a third of students are in programs that have ROI in the first 5 years. To say it the other way, 2/3 of students are in the 50% of programs with little or no ROI. So yes, we want to have many different ways for people to enter into post-secondary education at community colleges, but a lot of those are trapdoors. And if we want to think about what the challenge in front of us is, then it's that we need more good programs, and we need to make sure that more students are in those programs. Some of the problem here is the type of institution. For-profit certificates, we know, do not pay well as those from public institutions. Women, African American, Hispanic, Latino students, and those from low-income families are more likely than others to earn their certificates from for-profit institutions. So that's a big issue. But this doesn't let public institutions off the hook. The public community colleges need to create more of the high-quality programs in fields such as nursing and allied health, transportation, logistics, manufacturing that provide good ROI. Now, one very positive development is the increased spending we're seeing by state governments on short-term credential programs. 17 states, including the Texas True Grants, as we heard about just a minute ago, have used over $200 million in flexible funds provided by the CARES Act to create short-term credential programs. And in other states, they've already actually started using their own dollars to fund these programs, providing free programs. And taking one step beyond that, some states have already then decided to use their own money to sustain these programs. Early data from Louisiana and North Carolina that suggested these programs attracted disproportionately large numbers of men of color, so breaking through to a population that has not actually been served as well as we'd like it to be by community colleges. We're seeing lots of strong employer interest. So what's in our way to doing more? Here's a couple of challenges I see. Community colleges, as you all well know, face a set of resource, information, and institutional challenges to creating new programs, right? How do we build programs that are aligned to the labor market? There's lots about the way that community colleges are set up, the way they're funded, that doesn't allow for the kind of agile creation of these programs. So that's one thing that we've got to keep our eye on and think about how we can change. Community colleges also face a number of challenges to creating and sustaining partnerships with employers, right? Some good news is that there are some pots of dollars in the sort of current federal budget plans that would create dollars for employer partnership that will be beneficial. But whether that happens or not, we've got to figure out how to go even further in our partnerships with chambers of commerce, with other kinds of industry associations. We've got to think about how investments in something like infrastructure or green energy, those are going to only succeed if community colleges are right there with them. So we've got to think about how we build that alignment. And of course, there's a large set of navigation challenges. How do we direct students to the certificate and certification programs that have ROI? How do we think about different kinds of collaborations for traditional age students with high schools, for older students with communities? We've really got to, take that next step. Let me say more about this with the second goal that you have for today. Sorry, I didn't move it forward. So this is the ROI on student ROI. All right, so your second goal talks about choosing a program of study, which is another way in my mind to say participation or enrollment and re-enrollment. Here, I think we need to really remember the "if you build it, they will come" DNA of community colleges. Now, I realize I used to think this was someone, everyone was familiar with the movie that this comes from, but you can go Google it. There was a movie where the theme was, if you build a baseball park in the middle of a cornfield in Iowa, people will show up. Community colleges, they were designed as universal access institutions. Like they were never, no one conceived of them as having a lot of muscle around kind of outreach and navigation. It was meant to be a place where people could come and avail themselves of what was offered. And that was a good thing. Again, the world has changed, right? We need to have a far more sort of active, a far more robust muscle in terms of understanding the different kinds of students that are interested in community colleges, understanding how to identify them, how to engage them, how to bring them in, how to onboard them. And that's a whole body of work that has not received the kind of focus that it needs. And that's why I applaud the work that you're doing here to really sort of dive into that. Part of it is funding, right? It hardly needs saying that we don't fund community colleges to develop sophisticated outreach around participation. And if we look at the student side of this equation, we know that there's just a challenging, what I think we often call intention action gap. Many people, traditional age students and adults, say they want to go back, but struggle to take the steps to enroll. Good news here is across the country, we're seeing a lot of innovation around this challenge. A recent study of Florida community colleges found that offering information and a free class increased the likelihood of re-enrollment by 21% for students who were previously academically successful and had recently dropped out. Offering information alone had insignificant effect on re-enrollment rates, right? So bus ads, postcards, not going to do much. The second interesting trend I think we're seeing is around forgiving institutional debt. Henry Ford College has joined 3 other Detroit higher education institutions and the Regional Chamber of Commerce in an innovative program that allows students who left college to re-enroll and complete their degree by forgiving up to half of the past due balance owed. Not only does this remove a barrier for students who want to re-enroll, officials have reported that a significant return on investment. One of the institutions, which forgave $39,000 in past due debts from 2018 and 2019 fall and winter terms, netted $373,000 in tuition and fees paid by students, right? So the way we think about debt is getting not just in the way of students, but getting in the way of the success of the institution. There's been a lot of positive work done around data-informed outreach. Wake Technical Community College in North Carolina developed a Finish First NC data tool as part of an outreach campaign using personalized data about a student's existing credits and remaining time to a credential that resulted in a 15% re-enrollment rate and a more than 100% improvement over previous campaigns. The data tool discovers students who have actually fulfilled requirements to complete credentials, but have not claimed them, and identifies students who are close to earning credentials to encourage completion. The tool's been scaled to nearly all 58 community colleges in North Carolina, resulting in identification of nearly 60,000 previously unknown credentials and over 200,000 students who are near completers. And students of color are overrepresented in those identified. And then finally, we're also seeing a positive impact from focusing on diverse representation and outreach. Since November of 2020, Kentucky's Never Underestimate You campaign to enroll adults using multiple partners, a high-profile spokesperson with trusted ties to the Black community, a campaign hotline, and quality creative content exceeded expectations. In 3 months, the campaign was generated the number of leads it previously generated over more than 3 years. But of course, better outreach tactics are not enough. For colleges to meaningfully address the participation challenge, they need to really think more holistically about strategic enrollment management planning with an emphasis on adults. Right? There needs to be a focus on applied degree and short-term credential programs, building recruitment mentality and infrastructure on campus, relationship building with communities representing target populations, and proactive and sustainable enrollment strategies, goals, and campus tactics. The good news here is that many community colleges are well on their way towards redesigning their business model to better serve low-income adults looking to reskill and upskill with occupational aid degrees and short-term credentials. Many of them are here in the room with us today. I think of these often as 40-yard line colleges. They crossed over into enemy territory and they're headed towards the end zone. And we're all going to learn from the advances they keep on making. I want to end by talking to you about your third goal, which I'll translate as student success. Here, there's a close connection between what is happening in Texas and Lumina's approach. As you heard, we recently launched the Racial Equity and Adult Credentials in Higher Education Collaborative, a national initiative focused on helping thousands more Black, Hispanic, Latino, and Native American adults earn credentials. A total of 48 community colleges in Texas are participating in the collaborative, creating pathways from quality credentials to associate programs that embed culturally sustaining practices and sequence student supports. Let me just quickly talk about the three components of this work. So it hardly needs saying that enrollment does not equal completion. We can create more high quality programs, which we need to do. We can increase enrollment and re-enrollment, which we need to do, but it won't mean much if nobody succeeds in attaining a credential. There are three key improvements that can be made to better serve adults of color, as well as the general community college student population. The first is expanding credential as you go, or incremental credentialing approaches. In these programs, workforce credentials are embedded in associate degree pathways to ensure that students receive industry certifications as quickly as possible on the pathway to an AA degree. In states that have adopted this approach, such as Virginia, adult student completion rates have doubled. Bundled and sequence supports is the second component here. Non-tuition expenses like childcare, food, transportation, housing account for 80% of the cost of attendance at community colleges. As a result, students need access to traditional financial aid, as well as additional resources to meet these needs. Research shows that when adult learners receive support services, this can increase credential completion rates by as much as 24%. These services, along with coaching and advising and other forms of holistic support, cannot be piecemeal. Students who are able to access a bundle of supports at critical times throughout their programs are more likely to succeed. And finally, culturally sustaining practices. A number of guided pathways, community colleges are reporting gains in completion for Black, Latino, and Native American students by adopting culturally relevant learning and advising approaches. A recent example of this is from Colorado, where 3 community colleges adopted culturally relevant practices in their gateway course redesign. Success rates more than doubled, with 2/3 of students completing courses. Let me conclude by saying that when it comes to student success efforts, we are building on the work that all of you here and your colleagues across the country have done over the last decade, if not longer, to adapt and redesign community colleges to meet the needs of today's students, employers, and communities. We are honored at Lumina to play a role in this transformation and look forward to work with you as we write this new chapter for community colleges and community college students. Thank you. And I think we have time for some questions. So if you've got a question, raise a hand, and I think there's somebody with a microphone. Here she comes.
I'm just curious how you defined ROI, return on investment.
So I will not even hazard to give you the full technical description, but if you go to the third way, and we can share the deck, I have the site. The research is by Michael Itkowitz. And it's again, I think we're seeing this iteration. Every wave of new data we get on a program outcomes allows us then to have these kind of more sophisticated looks at how we differentiate the success of different kinds of programs.
Hi. When you were using AA and BA, were you using that as a placeholder for all associate's degrees and all bachelor's degrees, or just the Bachelor of Arts and Associate of Arts?
Placeholder, right? I agree that if you want to drop down a level, right, there's important distinctions to be made. But if we're trying to understand, I think the sort of larger contours of how the system works and doesn't work, those work well enough. Other questions or comments? I'm very eager for comments too.
Can you comment on the merits of and the outlook for short-term Pell?
So, we could be here until the weather clears, talking about short-term Pell. But I think the key issue there is that we need a system that is supporting the short-term training that happens at community colleges. Right. Again, we think about this framing of, we built a system 30 years ago. We had workforce over here. We never funded it very much. We've taken away a lot of the funding. We had community colleges over here, right? They did a little bit of it, but over time, a lot of that work has migrated to community colleges. But the way we fund community colleges, the driver being Pell, was never really designed for this kind of shorter term training. In fact, one of the results that was most striking from the Opportunity America research was that a large percentage, I think it was close to 70% of the workforce training on the non-credit side is less than, I think it was 120 hours, right? It fell kind of well below any of the Pell cutoffs that were even proposed for short-term Pell. So I think we just have to recognize here that we do need a system which is investing in quality training. Community colleges are really the best platform to do that. I understand there's a set of tensions around not wanting to shrink the pool of Pell dollars by spreading it farther. But on the other hand, I don't think we can continue not to support the needs of so many millions of students, traditional aged and adults, who need this kind of training to sort of succeed in the labor market. Industries also need students, workers who are trained in these skills. So I think in my mind, one of the most positive things we've seen, whether we think about it as Pell or not, is these investments like True and others using the Gears Fund. That is essentially, we haven't really called it that, but these are our trial runs at Workforce Pell. California's budget has $500 million for a version of Workforce Pell. So really, I think it's incumbent on us not to just to design these things well and give it all the capacity we have to make them successful. We've also really got to collect the data and tell the story about how these kinds of investments are really money well spent and having the kind of impact we want to see.
Oh, Chauncy, I'm back here.
Hi.
I have a question.
Sure.
About collecting the data. So we talk about how difficult that is. So do you have suggestions of how we can collect this kind of data so that we can make an impact in funding for students?
That's a great question. So I think the first thing we should do is understand better what data we are collecting, right? Now, there are some states, as I mentioned, Texas is one of them, but there's actually, it's not good enough, but there is administrative data around non-credit enrollment. There are other places. There's a community college president I spoke to when we asked him, what do you know about what's happening on the non-credit side of the college? And his answer was, well, we know if they paid with a credit card or not, right? So there's a wide range here. So let's start first by understanding what that variation looks like and understanding where we are doing it, what's working, right? That's the first thing. The second thing is, I think we have a tendency to, not a bad tendency, but we want too much too quickly, right? So, I will take responsibility as a funder and my funder colleagues for being part of that problem, right? It's very hard. We know this from the workforce world. Collecting data from people who are trained and then, placed into jobs is just brutal, cruel work that never really quite works. Tracking down individuals, getting to employers, right? We need to recognize that kind of work is going to be better done at the state level with, UI wage records, other kinds of large data set work. Virginia's a state that's done that, right? The second you sort of get over the hoops, the administrative hoops, you then have the ability to really understand what is happening program by program with the students who have attained these credentials. And the last thing I would say is that I think another thing is, of course, recognizing that certificates are not the same thing as certifications, right? We're going to have more control over certificates because you guys give them out and we can sort of better understand what's happening there. We do already better understand that. Certifications, industry certifications are going to be harder, where Lumina and others are investing in work that are getting the industry bodies to do a better job reporting who is attaining those certifications, so we can sort of embed them more in some of the data sets that are out there. And I'll say one last thing that's making this even harder, right? We all have heard a lot about, I'm not even sure what to call them, the certifications not coming from industry, but coming from Google and Amazon Web Services and Microsoft. I think those are all good things, right? More investment in quality credential training is a good thing, but the hype is way out in front of what we know so far, right? We don't, because we have this data challenge, we don't quite know if all the promises of these certifications are really going to deliver. So we've got to figure that out because there's just the boom and bust cycle of the conversation doesn't help anybody. Any other? No. All right. Well, again, thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your conference.
Thank you, Dr. Lennon. So appreciate those words. And for those of you who were really interested in all those studies, which I am, so I want to go back and review those. Those slides will be available along with all the slides from the Institute when you go to our events page on our website. So what we're going to do now is talk about what's coming up next. So I so appreciated all the comments and all the data that Dr. Lennon brought to the conversation, as well as the thinking about how we begin to bridge this gap between CE and CTE so that we better serve our adults in our communities. And so this is where you're headed next. So the very next thing you're going to do is spend some quality time with your team in team time. And in that team time, you're going to have some data to consider. So this is based on data that comes from iPads, but it also comes from the advanced work that you turned in on your enrollments and your completions. So you're going to be looking at what students are enrolling in programs and which students are actually completing those programs. So we can look for some inequities in those programs that are leading towards, this will come next, leading towards careers that are in demand and lead to a living wage. So you're going to buckle down with your team for an hour, but then we're going to celebrate. So from 5 to 7, right out here in the foyer outside the ballroom, we are going to have a very lovely reception, heavy hors d'oeuvres, cash bar, and a special treat. We have a band from the North Central Texas College that is going to be playing. Be sure to be there between 5 and 5:30 to catch the band, but the refreshments and the cash bar will be open through 7 o'clock so we can enjoy fellowship together. So with that, I will turn you to your program where it will tell you where your team will be meeting with your coaches from 3:30 to 4:30, and then we'll look forward to seeing you at the reception this evening. Thank you so much and have a good time. Good time with your data.